I remember the first time I watched Sniper Wolf die. She's laid out in the snow, outgunned by Solid Snake, lung shot, coughing up blood and steam under a black sky. She tells Snake about her sad, violent life. She's a Kurd, born on the battlefield, now clutching her rifle to the bitter end, her corpse soon to be surrounded by wolves in the Alaskan wilderness at Shadow Moses Island. This is hardly the first video essay about Hideo Kojima, and it won't be the last. And why is that? There's no shortage of mythical video game developers. There's Miyamoto, Romero, there's Gabe Newell, there's Ken Levine, there's Shinji Mikami. But then there's Kojima. How has this one Japanese developer become a global celebrity and a creative folk hero unlike any other figure in the history of video games? Sure, he made a bunch of great stealth action games in Metal Gear Solid. And then he made a horror game demo that was better than most horror games. And then he founded his own studio and made Death Stranding, this weird and gorgeous hiking simulator where you escort a baby across the United States and shoot human excrement at ghosts. What's the secret ingredient in all this? What's his central insight? Why do we love Hideo Kojima the way we do? I want to say the obvious. I want to say it's his curiosity, his taste, his humor, his quirks, and crucially, his independence. I want to say it's his capacity for drawing the last traces of light from his darkest characters and his bleakest predictions for humanity. But I'm sure you can already tell, just judging from the title and the runtime for this video, I want to say a lot of other things too. For the past decade or so, we've taken the whole notion of immersion for granted. It's this persistent watchword in the video game industry, immersion. It's the notion that the player should be able to pick up a video game and lose themselves in the story, the environment, and the mechanics. And contrary to popular belief, immersion isn't just about photorealistic graphics and 100-hour playtimes and so-called quality of life improvements. Immersion is about depth. The depth of your psychological investment in the interactive context. A video game doesn't need to be realistic to be immersive, though sometimes realism helps. Video games, even the more intensive, sophisticated, immersive JRPGs, were well short of realism by modern standards until consoles turned 3D with the Nintendo 64 and the original PlayStation in the mid-1990s. And even then, we still had a long way to go, and we weren't naive. We knew we still had a long way to go. I mean, you think we couldn't look at Cloud Strife's hands and recognize the graphical limitations of Final Fantasy VII? You didn't think we noticed that Aerith was built like a caterpillar? Of course we did. But in those deformed polygons, we could also behold the future. We could see a photorealistic character model taking shape, gradually, eventually. In the meantime, we let our imaginations run wild with the textures we got. To my mind, there's two different flavors of immersion. There's the immersion you'd find in Super Mario 64 or Ocarina of Time. These games are by no means realistic or even naturalistic. They're fantastical and strange and misshapen. They're otherworldly. They're utterly disconnected from your own realistic sense of human history or human anatomy. There's magic and dragons and shit. There's immersion into distant worlds. And then there's the immersion you'd find in, well, Metal Gear Solid. The characters have a more sensible style and proportion. Sensible in scare quotes, obviously. The environments are more mundane. They might even render places you've visited in the real world. The history in these games may well relate, however ridiculously or inaccurately, to the history you learned in school. Even the level design is more sensible. Elevators, cubicles, restrooms, Alaska.
Federal Hall.
What are you laughing at?
There's this immersion into the familiar. It's often war games and spy games going for this latter sort of immersion. But Metal Gear Solid was different. It was this weirdly melancholic counterterrorism thriller with so many clever quirks in its gameplay. Knocking on walls to lure patrols, huffing Valium to improve Snake's aim, blowing cigarette smoke to reveal infrared lasers, squirting ketchup on the ground to play dead, hiding in a cardboard box and then letting a wolf pee on the box so other wolves won't attack you in the box, watching other characters pee on themselves. Really, I'm just describing a top-down shooter with environmental puzzles and a few good gimmicks. Arguably more important was the dramatic sophistication in Metal Gear Solid. You had this engrossing and topical story about genetic legacies, the end of history, and self-determination. You had these villains with deep, tragic backstories and complex motivations. Foxhound, a terrorist group that's overtaken Shadow Moses Island, they're a band of tragic misfits. They spout crazy theories about gene therapy and nuclear proliferation. And then you had a hero, Solid Snake, a hatchet man out of the loop, a patriot betrayed by his handlers at every level on the chain of command. It's all very Hollywood, right? Stylistically, our hero Solid Snake is based on Snake Plissken, played by Kurt Russell in Escape from New York. Revolver Ocelot is a spaghetti western cosplay. The nuclear countdown, the bureaucratic betrayals, the strained patriotism. It's all very nostalgic for the drama of the Cold War. And that's Kojima for you. For such a big-brain guy, his taste in movies is pretty popular. He loves every thriller your dad used to collect on VHS. He integrated these popular masculine influences into Metal Gear Solid with a certain mix of bitterness and beauty. But then he also imbued his characters with a certain mix of sentimentality and absurdity. Foxhound wear these preposterous sex dungeon costumes. Here we are in the middle of Alaska, and we see a cowboy get his hand sliced off by a cyberpunk ninja. That's some premium weeb shit right there. Kojima stretched his characters and his story beyond the brink of absurdity, and yet he managed to produce a humane and thoughtful character drama. He made a tactical espionage stealth shooter about love. He compelled even the most brain-dead preteen to think a bit more critically about recent history and the world around them. He made video games a little more real. I've always got to remind myself that Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty came out before 9/11. I remember my history teacher wheeling a big box TV into the classroom so we could all sit around, astonished, watching the devastation of Lower Manhattan. I went home, and for the next couple of weeks, I watched the networks replay the airliners crashing into the World Trade Center and the towers collapsing over and over again. And then the aftermath. These political developments unfolded in a new, hypermodern landscape. It's the norm now, but then we were just beginning to live in a 24/7 mass media multiplex, broadcasting nothing but anxiety and rage. Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty is a game with a strong point of view on this new media landscape. If the first game marked the snowy twilight of the 20th century, then the sequel was a daring peek into the new dawn and all its disruptions. The privatization of warfare, the balkanization of political reality, a crisis in masculinity, and the creeping virtualization of life itself. We meet Raiden, a young and rather whiny hero forged in an intensive series of virtual reality missions before he's sent to defuse the Big Shell incident in New York Harbor. We meet Dead Cell, the quirky terrorist faction that's abducted the US president and held him hostage on the Big Shell. We encounter Solid Snake, masquerading as Iroquois Plissken. We encounter Otacon, desperate to rescue his kid sister, Emma.
Raiden, what's your status?
Colonel, I've got Emma Emmerich here. We've managed to avoid drowning.
Good job.
We meet the terrorist leader, Solidus Snake, who turns out to be the former US President George Sears. What's going on here? I played Sons of Liberty several months after the game's release, and I remember Raiden's introduction and Snake's whole Iroquois Plissken routine on the Big Shell being a bit of a head-scratcher. And sure, Raiden's a brat, and he spends half the game bickering with his girlfriend on the codec. His finest hour is him cartwheeling naked down a hallway. There's a certain dearth of heroism in Sons of Liberty. And it's not just Raiden. Even the villains, Fat Man, Vamp, Fortune, Solidus, they're much less sympathetic and somehow more ridiculous than Foxhound. Fortune's supposed invincibility turns out to be the result of a concealed electromagnetic device imposed upon her all those years without her knowledge until the minute she's outlived her usefulness to the Patriots. The Lolly-Lulay-Lo, the unspeakable AI hive mind that orchestrated the Big Shell incident to advance its high-tech social engineering project on a global scale. Again, it's all very Hollywood, to a point. But then, notoriously, Sons of Liberty culminates in something a bit more abstract and unsettling.
You seem to think that our plan is one of censorship.
Are you telling me it's not?
You're being silly. What we propose to do is not to control content, but to create context.
Create context?
The digital society furthers human flaws and selectively rewards development of convenient half-truths. All rhetoric to avoid conflict and protect each other from hurt. The untested truths, spun by different interests, continue to churn and accumulate in the sandbox of political correctness and value systems.
It's one thing for the villain in a story to have some points, but the fake Campbell and Rose, representing the Patriots, stab at these hypermodern anxieties we were only just then beginning to realize we had. But they're not dropping these truth bombs in good faith. They represent an authoritarian will to censor the general population based on their insights. They're the bad guys. They're condescending. They address Raiden with utter disdain. They manipulate and misinform him at every turn. And then they have the nerve to cite his ignorance, which they cultivated, as the very reason for their rule.
I'm not going to stand here and listen to you badmouth the greatest democracy the world has ever known.
Their proposed solution to the disintegration of society is its own sort of civic death spiral. Ignorance begets censorship, but then censorship begets ignorance, on and on. Their response to this reality is as dark as the reality itself. I want to be clear here. Sons of Liberty isn't just some high-minded screed about the internet. There's some extremely long cutscenes, but there's also a fantastic video game with great level design, great mechanics, great music, great style. Still, it's the rare bit of entertainment that captivates a wide range of perspectives and identifies a common anxiety we might share about the modern world. In America, at least, it's increasingly hard for entertainment to engage us in this way. You see this in recent conversations about The Matrix. The notion that the left used to own The Matrix, but then the right stole the whole red pill concept and ruined the movie's significance. But that's not how this works. The truth is no one, not the left, not the right, not Warner Brothers, not even the Wachowskis, own The Matrix. I mean, yes, Warner Brothers owns The Matrix in the financial sense, but you get what I'm saying. Intellectually, no one owns The Matrix. It's not some political prop. This isn't Kirk Cameron saving Christmas. This is art. It's so much more complex and interesting and universal than a simplistic designation, woke or based. And that's the thing about Sons of Liberty, too. We may prefer different political ends and espouse different ideologies. We may even hate each other. But Kojima cut through our biases. He reached for a deeper explanation of our postmodern reality, and he said something real. And that's powerful. That's art. That's the gift and the curse in Sons of Liberty, because that game, for better or worse, urged a lot of us to overthink every other video game we've encountered ever since. It revolutionized our expectations for mature video games. In fact, in a lot of ways, I think Sons of Liberty set in motion a lot of our current arguments over the proper role of politics in video games and games criticism. Now, speaking as someone who loves to take a political lens to games every now and again, I'll say I think we're often grasping for this game in particular. And we mean well. We want to extract some deeper conviction from the odd political gestures in Wolfenstein or Far Cry. We grew up and we're clamoring for video games to grow up alongside us. So we think back on those codec calls with Campbell and Rose, and we're still chasing that high. But you can't ask every video game to be Sons of Liberty. Hollywood produced The Matrix, but Hollywood also produced The Rise of Skywalker, you know? Even the other Metal Gear Solid games are hardly as self-conscious or profound as Sons of Liberty. Snake Eater is a 1960s Cold War espionage throwback in the spirit of James Bond. It's got a deranged astronaut, a vengeful ghost, and a subterranean beekeeper for some reason. It's got a nifty camouflage system. It's got a brutalist mech with a preposterous design document. It's got Rykov. It's got the ladder. It's got the end. It's got a final boss fight with hand-to-hand combat in a field of white lilies, while a retro pop standard swells in the background. It's beautiful, because Kojima wouldn't be Kojima if he was just some sweaty pomo pacifist with a lot of hot takes about the military-industrial complex. He's still also the whimsical weirdo who turns Revolver Ocelot into a cat girl. He's eclectic, he's provocative, he's sentimental, he's romantic, and sure, he's occasionally profound. But more than anything else, he's a supreme connoisseur of top-shelf anime bullshit. At this point, Kojima's bigger than any one of his games. He's achieved a weirdly high stature in pop culture for a video game developer. He's right up there with Elon Musk and Kanye West and Quentin Tarantino, reveling in heterodoxy and independence. You don't have to like Elon or Kanye to understand why I'm drawing this comparison. It's less about the merits of their respective contributions to the world, and more about the texture of their celebrity and their entrepreneurship. There's this insurgent masculinity, a certain late 20th century dad core sentimentality raging against the newfangled globalist modernity. There's a very public and protective fussiness about their respective works in progress. There's an embattled visionary at odds with some conventional authority or critical consensus. Kojima's former employer, Konami, published Metal Gear for years. Konami published Kojima's other titles, Snatcher, Policenauts, Zone of the Enders, PT. But a rift emerged between Konami and Kojima around the aborted development of Silent Hills with Kojima and Guillermo del Toro. There were creative differences. There was a cold commercial logic to these creative differences. There were business trends. For the past decade, Konami has shifted its resources away from the development of its story-driven console titles, namely Metal Gear Solid, Silent Hill, Castlevania, in favor of mobile games and pachinko. And that's very much not the typical scale of a video game created, directed, and produced by Hideo Kojima. Increasingly, from Metal Gear Solid 4 through Death Stranding, Kojima took on a sort of world-consuming dramatic scope. PT being the exception, of course, but that's down to circumstance. Call of Duty was still bigger than Metal Gear Solid, but Kojima was larger than life. His games became grandiose. And that's made for some ups and downs. Even his biggest fans will concede the overindulgence in his hour-long cutscenes. But he sold so many games and blown so many minds and earned so much goodwill over the years. Far more goodwill than Konami's earned at this point. So Kojima's own fussiness inspires a certain protectiveness in us. If Kojima's cutscenes are too long, that's for us to say, not the suits at Konami. So, the culmination of a long and ugly breakup behind the scenes, Kojima leads an employee exodus from Konami and incorporates his own studio, Kojima Productions, independently. He announces the studio's debut title, Death Stranding. The reveal trailer shows a man wordlessly sobbing over a newborn on a beach, littered with tar and haunted by apparitions with umbilical cords. We wonder what the hell any of this means. 4 years later, we finally get to play Death Stranding, which turns out to be a post-apocalyptic hiking simulator with Facebook likes, emoji spam, and a baby-raising mechanic. Death Stranding is a lot. It's the cross-country adventure of a disillusioned deliveryman, Sam Porter Bridges, reconnecting the regions of a post-apocalyptic civilization that's been split apart and driven underground. It's a story of American decline. It's a story of American renewal. It's a story about the pain of fragmentation and isolation. It's a game about being overwhelmed by the natural world, by the supernatural world. Death Stranding is a mixed bag. It's Kojima's worst urge to turn every other cutscene in his games into its own feature-length film. But it's his best urge to elevate the tried-and-true, open-world, waypoint-driven survivalist shooter into something a bit more interesting and ambitious and heartfelt. And look, I like babies, and I like hiking, and I like streaming music playlists. I don't know what to tell you. I like Death Stranding. I love how Kojima reduces his characters, even his most big-brained, theory-addled villains, to deeper anxieties and heightened emotions. This is what I love about Death Stranding. This is what I love about Kojima's games in general. It's why, and bear with me here, but it's why I rather like Quiet in Metal Gear Solid 5, despite everything there is to dislike about her treatment in The Phantom Pain. Don't get me wrong, we're definitely contending with Kojima's best and worst tendencies here. Kojima definitely could have given Quiet the decency of some fatigue pants and a private shower on Mother Base. And even then, she's no Sniper Wolf. She's not the boss. But in such a compromised game, at the end of an exhausted series, she's the vestige of Kojima's romanticism. Metal Gear Solid was always a series about love, in so many forms, on the battlefield. The scene with Snake and Quiet dancing wordlessly in the rain on Mother Base, it's sincerely bizarre, but it's also sincerely moving. That's Kojima. That's this broken game's beating heart. That's the sort of weird but good idea that got lost in this game's troubled development. That's the thing about Kojima. He's not a war historian. He's not a political theorist. The fake Campbell and Rose and Sons of Liberty aren't just predicting cable news and social media. They're also describing a culture of fear and loathing, a culture of loneliness, a loveless world. And the game doesn't end on those dark predictions. It ends with Raiden and Snake still seeing the potential for a bright future. A future where humans reclaim these tools and build something better. We can leave behind much more than just DNA through speech, music, literature, and movies. What we've seen, heard, felt, anger, joy, sorrow. We need to pass the torch and let our children read our messy and sad history by its light. We have all the magic of the digital age to do that with. This world was absurd, but this world was our own. This world was overflowing with cynicism and lies.
Snake! What was she fighting for? What am I fighting for? What are you fighting for?
If we make it through this, I'll tell you.
Okay, I'll be searching too.
Guys, thank you so much for watching. This is the first video I've ever made. First YouTube video, first video of any kind I've ever made. It was super fun to make. I hope it was fun to watch. Please like, subscribe, share the video, go post it on Reddit. Somebody get this thing on Hacker News. I don't know. Comment below. I'm open to feedback on this one. Like I said, it's the first video essay I've ever done. YouTube is a different format for me. I want to meet the medium on its terms. Yeah, constructive feedback. Let's do this again sometime. Thanks for watching.